Hi everybody, welcome back to RSAC 2025. You're watching theCUBE's Day 3 live, wall-to-wall coverage. My name is Dave Vellante. I'm here with John Oltsik. John Furrier is also here, as is Jackie McGuire, the whole CUBE team. Erik Bradley is in the house. Erik and I did a breaking analysis looking at ETR's latest annual State of Cybersecurity Survey. Erik, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dave. Very nice to meet you as well.
We flew out here together. I walked back in our in the plane and I saw you had this stack of data. It was awesome. I mean, every single company here in this industry, you've got the DataANGLE. So we're going to get into that, but you've had an opportunity to meet with a number of folks here. You were, last night you had some dinner with some Wall Street types. You've been meeting a lot of the vendors, chit-chatting with the practitioners, as has John. What are you seeing? What's the big trends?
You know, I think it wasn't a surprise, but without a doubt, this is the everything, all agentic, all the time type of week we're seeing here right now, whether it's from the practitioners trying to figure out how it's going to be used and utilized, or the vendors going ahead and rolling it out. I mean, CrowdStrike's done, what, 3 AI agents this week? Sentinel-1 trying to keep pace with an agent. Even the Netscope rolling out a DPSM agent. So it's really been agentic all day, I think, is what we're hearing right now, and there's some data we can talk about that in a minute. The other theme I'm talking about also is just everything SPM. It's a time right now where I think you're trying to encompass security posture management across all angles, whether it's network, cloud, application. So those teams seem to be the two big things to me, but I'm curious, what have you seen?
I've seen the same thing. I see a lot of activity on the data side and on the identity side as well. And then I've looked at security operations for a long time. That's a market that's completely in transition. Every layer of the stack is in play.
You know, it's interesting. So on these agents, what we're seeing a lot is they're actually trying to roll out a SOC analyst, right? They're talking about, okay, I'm going to report the threat. I'm going to flag it up. These are the jobs that a traditional SOC analyst would do. So it's like the agents are trying to address that SOC analyst fatigue. It's really interesting.
Yeah, layer 1 SOC analyst, or level 1, I'm sorry, level 1 SOC analyst. That's a junior person. They're doing triaging of alerts. That is an agentic AI absolute role.
Yep, and I think that's a smart place to start because it's something that's needed, it's necessary. Not only is there fatigue, but there's a shortage of actual hiring. So it's the right way to address it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but is there reliable data that you can actually trust? Because I always see agentic. When I hear agentic, I'm like, okay, what's the data? You know, let's start there. What access to data do you have?
Well, if you're talking about the person rolling it out, right, that's going to be based on what's CrowdStrike, the telemetry that they're collecting. So you have to trust your vendor that the data is going to be valuable enough and intelligent enough to act on.
But I have to believe, John and Erik, that there's a spectrum of data quality, you know, by each platform.
Sure.
And so, who's got the best data? I mean, I would think if you got the best data, it's going to at least accelerate your agentic strategy.
Yes, but if you've got Splunk, if you've got Google, Security Ops, you've already kind of decided that, Dave. You've looked at the logs, you've looked at the fields in the logs, and you want to get them. And of course, an agentic AI agent is going to be able to crunch those numbers faster than your son, my son, our daughters, who would be the junior person.
I love to squint through the marketing and try to get to the facts. So you've got, I mean, just in this topic, you know, George Kurtz at CrowdStrike said, we got the agent, and that's where the action happens. The network, the bad guys just, you know, that's a highway. They just traverse the highway. And then, you know, all the really bad stuff happens at the end point. And so our agent is key. I asked G2 at Cisco what he thought about that. He goes, yeah, it's always easy when you're on the other side and you're not in the middle of the network to say, oh, that stuff doesn't matter. But we have, it's not an either or, it's an and we have this great telemetry.
What about your BYOD, bring your own devices, and you don't have enterprise browsers half the time? The way you're accessing the application, not everything has an agent. So endpoint isn't the only thing. There's a big threat gap.
And then you got
that
Palo
has
Alto
to be addressed in other areas.
And the Palo Alto saying, well, we got the best data because we have, you know, with this, we've consolidated it all. We got access to the best data. And you've got, you know, this company and that company saying, oh, yeah, we've got great data too. So, what's the truth? I got to believe that everybody's probably partly correct, but there's still some missing pieces out there. What's your take on that?
All of the companies you just talked about do have good data, but they don't have all the data. Absolutely, there's to your point about posture management, there's more data being created every day, and gathering that data through the right APIs, having access to the APIs, that's the challenge. And so, yes, they all have good data, but no one, absolutely no one has complete data.
So let's get into the data. So as it relates to AI spend, of course, looking at the survey that you guys have here, I mean, everybody's planning to spend on AI tools, or they already have. I mean, we're talking about, it's actually a little bit down from last year, which was kind of interesting. So what do you make of that?
So last year, I think there was not fatigue, there was still excitement. So people were planning to spend in the future at a higher level. And don't get me wrong, we're not talking about a huge drop here. But we did see on a trend line, lower expectation of forward spend in AI and security. Even more so, the data I think was interesting when we asked specifically about how many AI agents have you already specifically rolled out in security. Only 3% have said they've already done it across the entire portfolio.
The answer was yes, fully implemented across multiple systems. That was 3%, partially was 15%, currently testing 9%. So not insignificant, and not yet, but we're thinking about it, was nearly 20%. And then 34% said not yet, but considering it. So only 16% said no plans, and then 5% not sure. So you got a good 80%. Roughly saying, yeah, we're going in that direction.
And I hate the baseball term, but we've heard it a million times over the last 3 months. We're in the second inning, maybe the top of the third inning, but I think this data is kind of showing that people still believe it, but the spending last year, the intent to spend last year was higher than it is this year. I think there's a little bit of a stop, wait and see, let's do our due diligence before we go ahead and rush in. Now, the last point on that AI series that we pulled that thread in the state of security was when we asked people, is this the future? Okay, maybe you're not rolling it out now, but is this the future? It was almost unanimous. Everyone said yes. Agentic AI and security is the future of security.
But look at this. Have you hired new talent specifically for AI LLM-enabled security systems? This is where the data is interesting because it's somewhat, the answers are somewhat contradictory. If that's the case, then you'd think they'd be hiring. Now, maybe they can't hire. But here we have no. The percent that said no went up from 41% to 53%. We have no plans to hire new AI talent. And no, but we have plans went down from 42 to 35. Yes, we already have went down from 17 to 12. So either they're not putting their money where their mouth is, or they can't find the talent. It's probably a combination of both.
I want to hear your take on it, but I view that data differently. If the vendors are rolling out a good quality agentic AI feature,
they don't need to
then
hire.
Why would I hire? That's supposed to be the hire.
I think there's
interesting.
I think there's bifurcation there. If you're a large enterprise, you're probably doing this development yourself.
True.
Because you've got lots of different vendors, you've got proprietary data, you may even have sensitive data or even confidential data. Whereas I agree with you, if you're a smaller organization, I can't do this. It's going to be really hard to find people with security and AI development skills, and therefore I'm going to rely on the vendors themselves.
And that's a great point because this question doesn't operantly define, are we talking about in building it yourself or managing it?
Right.
So there's really no way to determine that, so that's a great point.
And maybe the organizations are putting their AI hiring talent elsewhere, not necessarily in security, because I think
I don't think maybe, I think that's true.
Yeah, and
they're putting it in any kind of a business, driving revenue, driving efficiency.
And when we talk about agents, I always end up talking about knowledge graphs, and the security industry has always been a pretty big user and adopter of knowledge graphs, more so than the traditional mainstream enterprise has, because knowledge graphs are great, they're expressive, but to actually query them, you got to go back 15 years and do unnatural acts up until recently. But anyway, I want to come back to posture management. So there's some interesting data in here. When you ask, where's the budget increasing? It's cloud security, multi-cloud, LLM protection, ransomware protection, and then, it's not, it's in the middle, vulnerability assessment and management. But when you asked about what the priorities are, posture management, or what I think they termed vulnerability management, went through the roof. I want to sort of set this up with something that Nikesh Arora said at our roundtable at Palo Alto Ignite. You saw what I wrote and you commented, thank you for doing that, and brought in your broader practitioner community. But basically said, everybody calls it posture management and they think that fixes everything. That's not the case. And of course, his comment there was in response to a bunch of analysts asking him about Wiz, and the impact of Google. Right. And so we know Wiz for a period of time anyway was hurting Palo Alto's business. Maybe they've stemmed the tide. I think, John, you said that. But let's bring it back to posture management. What's your take on what you're seeing out there? Is it as important as everybody said? Of course, it's important, but is it as important as the whizzes of the world sort of seem to be projecting, and is there posture management washing going on?
Yeah, this is one I could go on all day on. The first thing is our terminology is off. So vulnerability management, exposure management, posture management are all basically the same thing.
Sure.
And we're carving up terminology and confusing the market. So that's the first thing. The second thing is hybrid IT is moving so quickly and it's so specialized that you need these specialized posture management tools for cloud, for identity, for data. Now, that gives the practitioner in that space better visibility into what they're doing, but somehow I have to aggregate that data for risk management purposes. So both of those things are happening, but in terms of SPM, it's generally in a particular domain that you need that specialization.
Completely agree, and I think I agree also that this week where I'm seeing it most is on data, so the data security posture management side and identity. And a call out Netscope, they rolled out a DSPM, which is, I don't want to use the word platformization, but let's talk about a consolidation of the vendor stack, right? This is an underlying theme in security. So as you see these people that, they were CASB first, now they're rolling out DSPM. I've seen some identity access management people roll out some posture management on one. I'll call out 1Password, been around for 21 years, still private, but man, they have some really great technology. I was really impressed with what they've been rolling out. So it seems as if all of these vendors recognize that there's a platformization push as a strategy, but they can't do it in just their core space. CrowdStrike's doing it as fast as anybody is, and Palo, of course, also. They made that acquisition in Protect AI. But yeah, I agree with you that the terminology is really what's morphing here. All of it, all a CISO cares about at the end of the day is your vulnerability management. That's where everything starts.
Yeah, and I would just, one other point is, it's one thing to identify a vulnerability, it's another thing to fix it. And so these SPMs are closer to the people who fix those vulnerabilities, whereas the reporting is to the people who have to understand overall risk.
So Nikesh was using this term, and I hadn't heard it a lot. I'm sure security people hear it all the time, but this peacetime versus wartime security. So the peacetime would be my posture management, is that right? And the wartime would be remediation? Is that how we should think about it? Or what is meant by those terms?
I don't know.
Or is that just marketing BS?
I think it's his terminology, because to me you're always at war, or you're always anticipating war. But I do think he means the preparation, the prevention angle, and the risk management angle versus the boots on the ground. There's something we don't know, there's something suspicious. What is it? Do we need to respond quickly?
I always viewed that as security hygiene versus actionable response is how I always viewed it. But yeah, again, there's no way for us to know exactly what he meant by that statement. The truth is, though, you have to do both at all times. Whether you're in peacetime or wartime, they're both priorities.
I'm the non-security guy in the room. I'm like the generalist, and all these, there's like 10 or 12 security guys, and it was me and Matt Eastwood from IDC. He's not a security guy either. But all the other security analysts were like, oh yeah, it's wartime, peacetime. So I'm like, all right, I'm not going to ask the stupid questions.
It's a great soundbite.
Yeah, so I want to come back to platformization. Maybe we shouldn't be using that term because it really is a Palo Alto marketing term. So we should call that out. But it basically refers to this sort of consolidation play. George Kurtz, I was listening to something he was saying at one of the financial conferences. He was saying, look, it used to be best of breed product versus best suite. Now it's best of breed versus the best platform. They have a different strategy around platform. They'll connect in with Okta and Zscaler and other endpoint, other identity and cloud players. Whereas Palo basically saying, no, we're platformization, we are the platform. And so last year, we basically exposed the king has no clothes and said no customers are reducing the number of vendors in their tools, number of tools in their stack. This year was a little different. We're starting to see some early evidence that tools creep is slowing, is what we published, Eric. The percent that said they were going to increase went from 51% down to 40%, and the percent that said stay the same went from 37 to 48. So, and the number decrease stayed the same, 9%.
Right.
So we're not making really any progress there, although there's some early evidence that maybe the tools creep is slowing, and then later on, Nikesh Arora declared the end of best of breed. And of course, I'm recency bias with my little roundtable with him. And so you had this big decline, and we're moving to a best of breed approach, where we select the best vendor in each cybersecurity. So it went from 35% to 18%, but as you pointed out, you guys added a bunch of extra questions. Right. And so it's maybe not as definitive as we thought, but the question remains, is that consolidation, what Palo calls platformization, how real is it, how practical is it, and where is it happening?
Well, we've talked about this. So first of all, best of breed, the end of best of breed, one thing I've learned as an analyst, one absolute lesson is never, ever, ever say a category is dead. Because you'll be wrong. Remember when we said the mainframe is dead?
Tape.
Tape is dead, yeah, I'm showing my age. Platformization for these big guys is about share of wallet. It's, I want to be one of the major consumers of your budget. But I know I'll never get it. You have to message to, I want the whole thing, but you'll never get it. Platformization makes a ton of sense in the SMB market where it's either a platform or a service provider.
Yes.
If I'm a large enterprise, I have one of everything. In fact, I heard that from a CISO. He said, it's not like I'm replacing one thing for another. I have 10 things, and I have to rationalize that first before I move up. So absolutely, CISO's job is to rationalize their security stack at the same time as look at new needs. And so that's happening. I think that's reflected in the data.
Yeah, from a business perspective, large organizations have M&A, they have roll-ups, they have multiple divisions, they're not centralized, they're across globes. There's no way that we're ever going to see a consolidation on one platform. But real quickly on the data, I think it's a touch more telling than it was last year. Yep. There's a possible inflection point here for two particular reasons. Yes, the number of decrease stayed consistent at 9%, there's no doubt. The number that stayed the same was a big, big jump. So they're not expanding anymore. The thing that's not in that slide, but when you cut to ours, because all of our data can be cut by industry size, the larger you scale up the enterprise, the more it jumps. So that's 9% across all 500 respondents, which was up from 300 last year, by the way. We increased the N. However, Global 2000, 16% said they're decreasing.
So wait, you're saying that the very large companies, there's more,
are trying
there's more
to
evidence.
find, and
but broadly at the Global 2000, I mean, you're saying not as much, or there's more. There's evidence.
Yes, so that's all respondents. When you go to just large, it creeps up. When you go to Global 2000, it creeps up even more.
It appears there's proportionality.
Yes, but I think we need to change the narrative, and you're 100% right. This isn't about you're going to be one provider. That's never going to happen. There's no CISO that's ever going to allow that. You're saying, which is accurate, you're just trying to take a little bit more of that share. So there's somewhere else I can consolidate redundant vendors, I'm going to do it. And remember our large macro spending data? Yeah. For those people that said they're decreasing spend, we immediately ask them, okay, how are you going to decrease spend? And one of the number one raises is always, we're going to try to consolidate redundant vendors. That's what they're looking for. They don't want redundancy.
So, yeah, and one more point, I'm sorry, Dave,
no, please.
I go back to companies had multiple firewalls a few years ago. They had Checkpoint, they had Palo Alto, they had Cisco. And so they decided, let's pick one across our global enterprise because we get better prices, we have better skills, we can reuse rules. That goes on all the time, and that's reflected in the data, especially with large organizations. That doesn't mean for a second that I'm going to one platform.
Yeah. So Nikesh Arora also makes the statement many times that no independent cybersecurity company has more than like single-digit market share. Maybe they got 7 or 8%, whatever it is. And he says no cybersecurity vendor or no company has share. Microsoft has a double-digit share.
Oh, yeah.
So let's take them out of the mix, like we often have to do to just talk about everybody else. And so I got to say, Aurora's got cojones. He said 40% is his sort of target. And so Zeus Caravala and I were at that Ignite. We did a little breaking analysis afterwards, and I said, okay, what would be an indicator that the so-called platformization is actually happening? And Zeus said, if they get to 15% market share, then that would be, to me, an indicator. And I'm like, so I want to ask you guys, what do you think about that? Is that an indicator if they can get to 15% market share, or do they need 20, 30, Nikesh's 40% for us to clear that platformization is happening?
Well, the first thing is I don't know anyone who's tracking the market share of platform vendors because that assumes we have a solid definition of platforms, and I don't think we do.
Sorry to interrupt, but he's talking about overall share of wallet in the overall market. If the market's 200 billion, we're whatever.
Yeah, then in that sense I do agree, because Palo Alto has that opportunity, CrowdStrike has that opportunity. And there are a few other vendors,
Few
certainly Microsoft, and I can't discount Microsoft because I think they're doing good things. Yeah, I think that's true, but it takes a lot to consolidate. And ripping and replacing, I don't think that's going to happen easily. People have budgets. For instance, if you have Splunk and you say to your staff, well, we're thinking of replacing Splunk, they've built their career
Yeah, they're going to go,
on
well, I
learning
quit.
Splunk. So do you want to sacrifice that? So there's a lot that goes into it. I think fundamentally from a, I don't know, market share perspective, he's right. But I think if you go under the covers, it would be very difficult.
Well, again, I think I liked the way Zeus thought about it. It's like, okay, how do we measure it as analysts? Okay.
Yeah,
And so
he's
15%, 15% would be, interesting. And then at that point, we'd have to parse through, okay, how much of that market share gain is platformization versus just them selling other stuff, So thoughts on that?
It's also, they have very much an acquisition strategy, so it's like, okay, if you're getting more share just by acquiring things, I'm not really sure that's their definition of platformization either, right? For me, a platformization is that you land and expand because you're so good with your other offerings that it gets adopted. And I'm not necessarily sure if that's what we're seeing right now.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Cisco went from almost zero market share to pretty significant when they bought Splunk.
Yeah, and Palo's doing the same.
Exactly.
One of the things you wrote on your RSAC preview was, what does the Wiz acquisition tell us about this industry? It was a $32 billion acquisition, up from I think the original $24 billion. Wiz, Israeli company, says, oh, we're going to do an IPO. They hardly ever do. And so that was kind of interesting. Google buys Mandiant. A lot of people said, that's kind of a head scratcher, but now with Wiz, maybe it makes some more sense. We'll see if the deal goes through. But what, in your guys' view, does that tell us about what's going on with M&A, with posture management, with Google, with the hyperscalers, with the industry broadly? Pick one.
Well, I'll start with the data, and then maybe you can do the industry analysis. Wiz is the highest net score across all of our information security sector. There's no one higher.
And the net score is a measure of spending momentum.
Yes.
Right?
Wow.
It is by far the highest. However, when you look at our measure of pervasion or presence in our survey sample, so we do about 2,000 a quarter of IT end users, IT experts, so their pervasion is very low, but their overall spending trajectory is extremely high. Another thing that I found interesting with them is when I ran a correlation analysis between them and the three major hyperscalers, their lowest correlation was with Google. AWS actually had a much stronger correlation. So people that are increasing or adopting spend with AWS were much more likely to use it. So it seemed interesting to me that like the Google Wiz alignment was the one that ended up happening there. Listen, you cannot deny how good Wiz is from an efficacy standpoint. They are really interesting, really innovative, great company. We'll just wait and see now if Google could speak enterprise, because it's never really something they've been able to do at the very, very large enterprise level. And we'll see if they can. They're certainly trying. There's no doubt about that.
Good points all, and I think a couple of things. So one is Google Cloud security. They want it to be a bundled security solution like Microsoft, and they achieved that. Second is that they've got really good momentum with Google Security Operations, the old Chronicle. So now they can extend that to the cloud, and they have good momentum and good synergies there. And then if you look at Microsoft's security base, it's heavily tied to Microsoft assets, especially Azure.
Yes.
And so now they can tie security to Google Cloud. So all of that makes them, and this really makes them a dominant player in security overnight.
But does it make them a player for people that aren't already heavily invested in GCP cloud, whether it's for BigQuery or their data? Like, I don't see them winning net new movers, right? Is someone going to move from their infrastructure stack and their stack there to go to Google, and then now all of a sudden the cloud security is wrapped in? Or is this really just about enhancing their base that they already have?
I think it's more enhancing their base, but remember that a lot of large companies will have AWS, they'll have Google, they'll have Azure, and so maybe this skews them there.
Right.
I think this is good for the public sector, where they can
so.
really push this into the public sector. And I think longer term, maybe they can drive security revenue specifically or independent of GCP.
Right.
I'll also add to that remember, Google's got this year Google, our estimates are Google will do $54 billion in their entire cloud business. half of that will
Not
be
chump change.
it's not chump change, but everybody craps on Google. They're a distant number 3. That's a 50. How many $54 billion companies are there in tech? Half of that, for the first time ever, we think half of that will be Google Cloud Platform, which is growing significantly faster than their overall cloud business. So my point is, that will drag along business. That is a huge tailwind for them. I also want to point out just one little nuance in the data. You said Wiz is the number 1. Actually, Microsoft, right? Which is just astounding. Here, I mean, John.
I didn't say they were number 1. I said AWS was better aligned because
no,
generally
but
Microsoft is generally, we kind of keep them out of the picture. They're so ubiquitous.
But I'm talking about net score.
Oh, okay.
So net score, Microsoft actually has a slightly higher net score in your data than Wiz, which is,
yes.
but Microsoft is off the charts in terms of penetration. So
yes.
Here's Microsoft.
You can't even see it on the chart. Yeah.
And there's Wiz right behind him on the net score, which is essentially a measure of the net percent of customers.
I thought we were excluding Microsoft, but
Yeah.
since you bring it up,
fair enough. Right.
They are not only that, but in our product granularity surveys, like sort of our magic quadrant, but it's not magic. They're leading in almost every category. It doesn't matter if it's identity or where they are. They are a top leader every time.
I mean, you can see the players with momentum. Microsoft, Wiz, Grafana, interesting. Zscaler's always been pretty high, close to that magic 40% mark.
Rubrik, Netscope,
which was
SailPoint.
a backup company, transformed into a security company, very high. Netscope, Cloudflare, HashiCorp, Darktrace. Google actually, pretty significant. What's interesting is AWS doesn't show up on this because AWS doesn't really try to monetize security the same way that Microsoft does. So there's a lot of room for the ecosystem to play in the AWS sandbox. But will the Wiz acquisition, change that posture, or is it because Google and Microsoft have sort of up the stack applications business? It's more likely that they're going to monetize their security. You guys have thoughts on that?
Well, I think the other vendors will try to fill that void with Amazon, and I don't see Amazon now making an acquisition. Yeah. They try to facilitate security. They don't try to own security.
Agreed.
Right.
But I think that they'll look around for other players, and that may open up the market for someone we're not even talking about.
But it makes them a great platform for ecosystem partners because they're not going head to head.
Always has, by the way. They've always been the more open of those two.
And they use that to a strategic advantage.
Yep. And I think they will in security as well.
Yeah.
2 names that I had written out, the names I wanted to talk about on that. Just 2 others that really look good right now also. SailPoint and Fortinet are performing decently well in that net score as well. So just a really interesting space for me, the identity access space.
Interesting, yeah. Fortinet.
It's such a competitive area right now in that entire identity access management. It's going to be interesting.
Okta is right up there.
I've never seen it more active.
It's unbelievable right now.
Everyone kicked that can down the road for years.
Well, it's interesting. Again, you look at the data, and what ETR has, they have like a red, sort of gray, green, red, yellow, green almost. If you think about, green, yellow, red. Green being, high elevated net scores, gray kind of in the middle, and then red, not so great. Look at all the green in here. There's just tons of green. If you were to go into like storage, or consulting, or servers,
particularly consulting, right
there's
now.
no green.
Really bad right now.
There's no green.
There's
like zero green. It's all red, and so it underscores the dynamism in this marketplace. And all right, guys. Hey, great segment. Thank you so much for your insights.
Always
Eric,
enjoy
having you on.
And just real quickly, guys, we're about to launch a Google Wiz drill down survey.
Awesome.
So we're going to go ahead and find out. We're going to segment their actual Google customers and just Wiz customers and see how their sentiment changes. So if you, and we're going to go take a look, similar to what we did when Cisco first bought Splunk, and just kind of see what that reaction is and kind of compare and contrast the reaction. So
love to see
I'll have that out for a couple of weeks for you guys, and I'll follow up.
ETR.ai, you can download the summary of the latest annual cybersecurity analysis and survey. Check it out, ETR.ai. Eric, thank you. John, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. It's
really nice keep it right there, everybody. This is Dave Vellante for
Together
John Furrier, John Oltsik, Jackie McGuire, and the entire CUBE team. Hold on, guys. Let me exit first. Entire CUBE team. Keep it right there. We'll be back right after this short break. We're excited here. Day 3. Right back.
Sorry, Dave.
That's all good.
Sorry.